Meccano, part number 197 from the 1930s. Hi folks and welcome back. This week it's a dumper truck from the 1960s in yellow and zinc, but you knew that already. And if you want to find out about the amazing history behind the dump truck, there are 2 videos discussing it. So this week I'm not going to rehash old info, but I'm going to tell you something different. In fact, I'm going to talk about the moving of Earth and how it was done and impart some knowledge, hopefully, about this wonderful country, civil engineering, and what has been done in the world. But firstly, I'm going to tell you a story that I was told many years ago by a friend's dad. He was a character. I doubt if his type will walk this earth again. Serving in the British Parachute Regiment, he was doing a training jump over the Derwent Reservoir. That would be the one in Derbyshire. It was a night jump, in full kit, with live ammo, with a stick of inexperienced young recruits. The aircraft was blacked out with little to no light. At last the red light came on. The orders to stand up, hook on, check the person in front of you were given. The red light changed to a green light, and one by one they left the aircraft. Looking down, he saw the expanse of water, but it looked wrong. The shape wasn't right. And off in the distance was the glow of a steelworks. It was the wrong Derwent Reservoir. They'd dropped him over Consett, County Durham, his hometown. His second thought on landing was, bloody RAF couldn't get pissed in a pub if they tried. His first thought was what to do with his stick of recruits, looking a bit lost and not knowing what to do with themselves. 2 hours later, and in the early dark hours of the morning, his mum was woken by an incessant knocking at the front door. Opening the door, she was met with the towering shape of her son and 20 or so others, all armed to the teeth. "Hello, Mum. I brought some mates with me. Can we stay for the night?" He got them bedded down for the night, and in the morning walked to the local phone box and phoned in, to be picked up a few hours later and shipped back to barracks. What went wrong with the route was never sorted out, but the reservoir was newly built and the military had been doing training in the northeast, so maybe that was all it was. Consett has a long history with reservoirs. After all, the steelworks was a very thirsty beast and would drink a huge amount of water in one gulp. My father moved up to Consett in 1969 as the head chemist for the then Durham Water Board. The Derwent Reservoir had been finished by that point by 2 years. Durham Water Board had been merged to form Northumbria Water, and unknown to the population of the town, the writing was already on the wall for the steelworks. But the reservoir was a bone of contention in the town. The water, gathered by the Derwent River, our river, was never destined for the town. It was to be transferred by pipeline to the Tyne and Wear metropolitan area. Maybe the last laugh was on them. The reservoir was badly contaminated by deposits of zinc, lead and cadmium, washed down off the hills around Blanchland from historic mining carried out in the area. Measuring 5.5 kilometres long and covering 4 kilometres squared to a depth of 30 metres. It was seen as the answer to the major conurbation's water needs, as it holds 11 billion gallons, or around 1 year's water, of the 28 million gallons needed per day for the area. Unlike other reservoirs in the northeast, the Derwent was dug out of the valley, with the removed earth forming the dam wall. Normally a dam wall is constructed and then the valley is flooded. And while dumper trucks would have been used in the construction of the Derwent Reservoir, there was another dam in Derwentside that would have been cut by hand. It's strange now to think how things were done in history. The fort of Longvicium sits to the south of the village of Lanchester, overlooking the River Brownie, and has done for nearly 2,000 years. At one point it was home to the 20th Legion of the Roman Empire, with a garrison of around 1,000 troops. And most likely they were the legion who built it, having been called back from southern Scotland as the Empire was unable to hold the territory. Longvicium was an important fort along Deer Street, a Roman road that runs the length of the east side of Britain. To the west of the fort there is a reservoir and aqueduct that fed a holding reservoir above the fort. The main reservoir held in the region of 6.5 million gallons of water. It was stone-faced and lined with clay, and along with the aqueduct is one of the best preserved Roman reservoirs in Britain. The purpose of the water can only be for industry, as even though water usage was needed for baths and latrines, this was normal for any Roman fort, and was built into the organisation and planning of the fort in general when it was constructed. It is suggested from the evidence that Longvicium is an armatorium, or arms store, a major link in the supply of the forts of Hadrian's Wall to the north, and the garrison towns that were just behind the wall. The water would have been used for the smelting of iron and powering of water wheels and drop hammers. This theory is backed up with large amounts of slag and cinders found in the surrounding victus, meaning settlement, and outside of the gold mines of Wales, it's probably one of the largest Roman man-made reservoirs in Britain. And it was all done by hand, no dump trucks here. It's also one of the theorised battle sites of Brunabar in 937 AD, when King Athelstan, the first king of united England, fought and defeated an alliance between the Welsh Viking king Guthrusen, Constantine II, king of Alba or Scotland, and Owen, king of Strathclyde, a kingdom that covered the western side of Britain, from the Clyde to northern Wales. The invading force is most likely to have travelled down the east side of the country, as the terrain is more open with fewer bottlenecks to be trapped in, and historically has always been the route of armies, either invading Scotland from England or England from Scotland. But unfortunately the victory was a Pyrrhic one. He was unable to completely defeat the forces of Alba, Strathclyde, Ireland and Wales. And while for a short time there was peace, when he died 2 years later, childless, his kingdom was weakened by ongoing battles with the Vikings, Scots and Welsh. And just over 100 years later, Anglo-Saxon rule of England would forever be lost, and the English language would be changed by the introduction of French words with the Norman invasion of 1066. The collapse of the Roman Empire had a profound effect on the world at that point in history. Knowledge and learning would slow down and in some places stop altogether, as Picts from Scotland and Saxon raiders from Europe would expand to fill the vacuum left behind. Forts like Longvicium would stay in use. But with the withdrawal of the legions from Britain, the infrastructure that supported the auxiliary troops that were left behind also failed. Coinage was one of the first, as no new money came from the empire's coffers. And then too would law and order fail. Taxation would cease to be controlled by a governing body and would be controlled by local leaders, in some cases little better than warlords, with armed bands of militia. In time, with the effects of 3 pandemics within 400 years, the advance of the Goths from the east as they were pushed back by the Huns, and the growth of Islam, the empire was unable to withstand the pressures. It fractured into the Eastern and Western Roman empires, and even then the decline could not be stopped completely. And slowly the lights went out across the empire that had shone so brightly for so long. And with the passing years, Roman forts like Longvicium ceased to be used. At some point in the medieval period, the village of Lanchester was created. It would take over 1,000 years to recover from the collapse. In fact, longer than the span of the Roman civilization, which itself was over 1,000 years. What would we have achieved by now if we'd not lost that knowledge? Strangely, it was down to one of the nations that destroyed the empire that saved so much of that knowledge. As Europe pulled itself apart, with Saxons and Angles fighting, and then to have them merge as a nation, to then have the Viking incursions, and then settlements, to finally have Britain invaded by the Normans. To see other European nations destroyed by warfare, then ravaged by plague and famine, life was short and cheap. And while the early Christian and Islamic religions warred non-stop, knowledge was to be saved by the latter, while the former burned libraries and killed scholars. Our advancements to date are founded on the act of learning, and then the ability to retrieve the knowledge that had been saved. And in the 16th century, the fire of learning could be relit, and we could finally rebuild what we had lost. This build, while being a Set 3 build, is also part of the 1960s Meccano Highway vehicle set. A small set that covered 6 Set 3 builds. This is the second. The set is a nice, if somewhat nostalgic, and the vehicles dated in their design. But I feel that for Meccano, the empire was beginning to fracture by this point. They were fighting the incursions of Lego and Airfix and injection moulded plastic. It would be another 20 years before Meccano was no longer the toy that it had been before the Second World War. And by that point, the world had changed completely.